very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org radio, Global Alert News for December 5th, 2015. Another week of planet Earth completely under siege. Not a metaphor, this is an absolute fact. From climate engineering happening above our heads, decimating the planet, to a long, long list of other decimating factors. A lot of data to cover today. I'll do my best. Probably won't get through it all. This is a commercial-free news hour of hard-hitting data and perspectives with no commercial interruptions. That would diminish the gravity of the information presented here. My goal is and always has been this: to trigger listeners to actually investigate the facts for themselves. I've never asked or wanted anyone to take my word for anything. Rather, it's our responsibility, each of us, to investigate all the unfolding events that will make or break our collective futures and the future of our children. On that note, at the moment, if we don't completely change our course, we're on a trajectory for certain near-term human extinction. I ask anyone, please don't believe anything I say. Investigate the figures on current species extinction, implosion of marine ecosystems, implosion of boreal forests, collapsing of global plankton stocks. Please simply investigate what I'm saying. If you don't believe this and you continue to do nothing for the greater good, you continue to do nothing to change the course we are on, and see what comes. The denial or censorship of reality will not save any of us. For the record, DVDs are available at Reading Radio and Orchard Nutrition. DVDs that have a tremendous amount of information on them. I'm giving one each to anyone that will put these DVDs to use and hopefully make copies to pass on to others. There's multiple menu items available on this DVD, including testimony from former government scientists, physicians, pilots, Union of Concerned Scientists, etc., about the lethal dangers posed by the ongoing climate engineering insanity. On that note, something to consider about our Northern California so-called media. Again, for the record, KRCR, Channel 7, and the Record Searchlight newspaper have once again made their priorities clear in the latest story of mass and meaningless distraction, the Bigfoot blog story. No offense to the Bigfoot investigators, but when these two media sources, and I'm using the media term very loosely, when these sources can omit any objective coverage of the August anti-climate engineering event right in the heart of Reading, an event with over 1,000 in attendance, some from all over the country, with former government scientists, prominent physicians, former defense industry, other experts, all of which were trying to sound the alarm on very real and verifiable threats from climate engineering, threats that affect every one of us in countless ways. What kind of media do we have that would completely avoid any objective coverage of that issue? In the case of the Record Searchlight newspaper, editor Silas Lyons made it clear in writing that he feels he has the right to censor the news from his readers. The Searchlight completely blacked out the extremely important climate engineering awareness event in Reading. Yet, the Searchlight feels that Bigfoot warrants headline coverage. This kind of idiocy will continue as long as the public allows it and supports pitiful publications like the Record Searchlight. Unfortunately, KRCR was running a close second, as they truly did no objective coverage other than a short soundbite that was not in context of that all-important event. So again, headline from the Searchlight: Bigfoot investigation, as if that's what we really need to know at this time with all that's happening on planet Earth. Encouraging readers to draw their own conclusions from the evidence and arguments, our biosphere is imploding. The oceans are dying. Dozens of countries around the globe are descending into chaos. We're headed toward World War III. Northern California media is focused on, again, Bigfoot. So-called journalists that are helping to hide the crimes of our government, like the climate engineering assault, should be considered accessories to such crimes. Once the public is fully awakened, it's likely that, or hopefully, Nuremberg-type trials will be conducted if society is still intact, because things are disintegrating much faster than people understand at this point. It will become clear enough soon. Some other mainstream media headlines from the likes of Fox, MSNBC, and CNN. Birthday cake, only 4 of these, but I want to read this just to make the point. Birthday cake photo goes viral. Again, with everything I just named that's happening. We have our local media covering Bigfoot. We have mainstream media covering birthday cake photo goes viral. The slow crawl to designer babies. Porn star accused of rape assault. And finally, what makes a Christmas song good? Wow, how important is that? In Northern California, we continue to get completely engineered weather, a droughting out of the already drought-stricken region. We don't get storms like we did in the past, and it's astounding that so few people notice the amorphous sky, the featureless sky, very little wind, very little clear sunshine ever. It's always hazed out with what our local media people and other meteorologists call mostly sunny skies. The rain comes in drips and drizzles. In the meantime, everything dries up. Wake up, look up, do some investigation, find out what's really happening around the globe while our mainstream media is covering Bigfoot. Another mass shooting, this time in Southern California. This is certainly a horrible tragedy. My most sincere sympathy to all those that lost family and loved ones. But this being said, let's consider some alarming facts about this incident and many others like it. Why were authorities conveniently carrying out drills for just such an attack prior to this attack occurring? Why also, we have to ask, were so many other terrorist attacks like Paris, the Boston bombing, the 7/7 attacks, in London, the 9/11 tragedy? I could go on. In all these cases and so many others, the so-called authorities were very conveniently conducting mock drills for events just like the events that actually happened. Is that a coincidence? Do we really believe that it's just a coincidence? In regard to the most recent attacks in Paris, for example, let's consider the whole refugee crisis that was spawned and conveniently fueled by Western powers. I went over this in previous weeks. The bombing of infrastructure in so many countries that could only create refugees that were funneled into Turkey and held there. Turkey was paid to hold them there until they were all flooded out and herded everywhere they were meant to go, apparently. And I'm not saying these aren't real refugees. They're absolutely real refugees. When you bomb out countries and destroy infrastructure, you're going to end up with refugees. When you drought out these countries with NATO climate modification programs, and again, is it just coincidence that every single destabilized Middle Eastern country underwent protracted drought before the destabilization? And I know people, the global warming people, and again, the planet's warming, there's no question, but we have to admit to the geoengineering elephant in the room. Those that would claim all the droughts are related only to the warming climate, that's absolutely not verifiable by the data. On a warming world, it should rain more overall, not less. The laws of physics say so. So why is there so many convenient droughts in so many places where it serves the purpose of the power structure? Because climate engineering is making that happen. They can turn our water on and off at will. And this is hard science, backed up by patents, backed up by hard data, hard research, historical documentation of weather modification programs for any who care to look at the truth. Many don't. Much easier to ram your head into the sand. Won't be able to keep your head there much longer. Wait and see. So, as we have these refugees being fueled out and flooded everywhere, they made sure this would happen. They beat the drums of fear that all of us need to be terrified of these refugees, that are most of which simply trying to find their next bite of food, that again, the power structure themselves created, and now claim they're going to protect us all by clamping down on our rights and freedoms, protect us from the very crisis they created to begin with. Is there a picture forming here? There should be. I hope there is soon, because we don't have much time. How obvious can it be that all mainstream media sources are just reading the scripts they're given by those that control them. When the San Bernardino attacks occurred, suddenly all mainstream media sources were using the term long gun to describe the assault rifles that were used. All the media sources, MSNBC, Fox, CNN, all were suddenly using the term long gun. That's a sign that they're being given scripts. Since when is such a term being used for an assault rifle? Never heard this term before. In fact, the only time I've ever heard the term long gun used was on Last of the Mohicans. Why is it now suddenly being used by all the mainstream media sources, completely parroting each other? Let's get on to some other headlines, which we're not being told while our local media is telling us all about Bigfoot. Again, global collapse continues. Headline, the collapsing global trade, November 30th. The global economic trade, this is an excerpt from this report, the global economic trade is down 8.4% so far this year. Among the many economic indicators that experts use to gauge the health of the world economy, the Baltic Dry Index, I've spoken of this before, usually goes unnoticed. This index offers an indication of the global demand and supply of major stock materials that are used by manufacturers at the beginning of production. And the shocking truth is that the index has been plummeting to reach a new record low not seen before. This is another new record low, beating the old record low that I spoke about in previous weeks. Another headline, separate publication. Should we brace ourselves for the next global economic meltdown? The report continues. Maersk CEO Niels Smittegaard Anderson told Bloomberg that the global economic growth is declining and that the figures are much worse than forecasted by the IMF and others. Much worse. Pay attention to that. Contrary to what we may have been led to believe, the state of most of the world economy is in dire straits. That's a headline and an excerpt from the report. Another headline, this one posted by Charles Hugh Smith. The Last Christmas in America. The game of enabling more debt by lowering interest rates and loosening lending standards is coming to an end. The report continues. If we define Christmas as consumer spending going up while earnings are going down, 2015 will be the last Christmas in America for a long time to come. Continuing with the report. In a broad brush, Christmas, along with all other consumer spending, has been funded by financialization, i.e., debt and leverage, not by increased earnings. It's all a pyramid scheme. That's what this report is saying. The report continues. The primary financial trick that's propped up the quote recovery for 7 years is piling more debt on stagnating incomes. How does this magic work? Lower interest rates. Most people don't understand how the economic system is really working. They only understand that they can refi their house for almost no interest. They use their house for an ATM machine, and they go on consuming. The snake is just about done eating its own tail. Wait and see. Finishing with this report, in a healthy economy, households earn more money after adjusting for inflation, aka the loss of purchasing power. And the increased earnings enable households to save, spend, and borrow more. In an unhealthy, doomed to implode economy, earnings are declining and central banks enable more borrowing by lowering interest rates to zero and loosening lending standards. So anyone who can fog a mirror can buy a new pickup truck with a subprime auto loan. How many commercials do we all see of how many car companies buy their car, nothing down, no interest, no payments for 6 months? Do you think that's a sign of a good economy? And we know that many of the major manufacturers are actually purchasing their own vehicles to make their bottom line look better. Period. How long can that go on? It's reaching its end. And on top of all these economic indicators, I want to say again, as I have in previous weeks, when the biosphere implodes, when nature's ability to produce for the human race collapses, that's the end of the road. And we're there. It's not off on the horizon. It's happening now. And every single day, the climate engineers continue with their insanity of attempting to play God with the weather, lessens any chance we have for recovering to any degree that would allow the planet to continue to support life. Look up. Consider you're living under a toxic cloud. They control your rain. They control how toxic it is, how contaminated your soils are. This is not theory. It's not conjecture. There's a mountain of data, facts, film footage, patents, you name it, to build this up, or to back this up. Congressional documents, all you have to do is look and remember. In regards to what the power structure tells us is true or not true, and people at this time when everyone's desperate and clinging to this blind patriotism, thinking that their government is here to take care of them, and it's not just our government. I'm not picking on our government. Governments are corrupt, period. The larger the government, the more corrupt they are. I want to bring up again someone who I really would have given about anything to meet. I think he was probably one of the most exceptional individuals to ever walk amongst us, Pat Tillman. Anyone who really cares about patriotism in the true sense of the word should investigate the Pat Tillman story, who gave up multi-million-dollar football contracts to enlist in the U.S. military after 9/11, and who was later assassinated by his own military because of his notoriety and his willingness to speak out about what he saw and the preparations he was making to speak out. He was literally shot 3 times in the head, point blank, by fellow service members. What kind of people would do that to their own, following an order from somebody higher up the chain? And then the lies ensued, that Pat Tillman was shot in an enemy ambush, and his family was lied to, the public was lied to, everyone was lied to. This is business as usual for someone who truly wants to be a patriot for his country, who truly wants to tell the truth. Look up the Pat Tillman story. You won't like what you find. His parents are extremely intelligent, and they've been stonewalled by a U.S. military that doesn't want the truth to come out. And I state again, there's a lot of good people in the U.S. military. I salute your motive, but I'm asking you to wake up and find out what you're being used for against your own countrymen and people like Pat Tillman. A few more headlines from Iraq, who we supposedly liberated and brought freedom and democracy to. This is the mindset of the Iraqi people right now. Iraqi popular forces have pledged to combat any U.S. troops deployed to the conflict-hit Western Asian country. That's how much they love us in Iraq. Why wouldn't they feel this way when we have completely obliterated their country? Was Saddam Hussein a bad guy? Absolutely. Let's remember who armed Saddam Hussein. Let's remember who gave him the chemical weapons he used on civilians. It came from us. Let's remember the handshakes with Donald Rumsfeld and others on the record, on film. Look at your history. Look at your history. And it's up to us to look and not take the attitude of, I don't want to hear it, it's too negative. We have a responsibility, an absolute responsibility to our children to face the truth. An internationally recognized psychoanalyst like Scott Peck and others have stated the hallmark of a healthy mind is an unswavering willingness to face the truth no matter how dire. Further statement from the Iraqi forces today. We will chase and fight any American force deployed in Iraq. Any such American force will become a primary target for our group. We fought them before and we are ready to resume fighting. That's how much they love us over there. Why should our sons and daughters have to face that? Why were they sent there to begin with when we know Saddam Hussein had no weapons of mass destruction, nothing to do with 9/11? We've been all over the 9/11 issue. Anybody who believes the official story in that regard is still living in a delusion. Let's go over some more headlines. U.S. troops in Syria. U.S. troops arrive in Syria to, quote, train rebels. What could possibly go wrong with that? Our sons and daughters sent to train terrorists to topple the legitimate Syrian government. Doesn't mean you have to agree with the Syrian government at all. Doesn't mean you have to like Assad. It simply means that that is the legitimate government of the country. Do we have U.S. troops training in Saudi Arabia to topple the Saudi Arabian government that is absolutely tyrannical to its citizens? They chop heads off. They stone people. They stone women if they were raped. Why would you stone a woman for being raped? They hang headless bodies in their country, and that's our ally. We're not sending troops there, are we? No, because that's where the oil's coming from. They're our ally. We didn't do anything to Saudi Arabia after 9/11, did we? When all the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia, or at least that's what we were told. We gave almost 100 Saudi nationals a free ride back. No questions, no interviews, no interrogations. After 9/11, the only plane allowed to fly was Saudi Arabia. Completely tyrannical nation, no democracy, total dictatorship. We're not sending troops there to fuel rebels to topple that country, are we? No. Again, the hypocrisy is so immense. It's time for the American public to wake up and face this. More from this report about the Syrian troops arriving in Syria. AFP, American Free Press, is reporting that U.S. soldiers are now operating in northern Syria. U.S. soldiers are in Kobani, the town in northern Syria, nearly destroyed in fierce fighting with ISIS, to train Kurdish forces to battle the extremists. Kurdish sources said Thursday. Listen to this report carefully, it's not long. Mustafa Abdi, an activist in the town on the Turkish border, told American Free Press the American instructors had arrived in recent hours in what is the first official deployment of U.S. ground troops in Syria. A source with the Kurdish People's Protection Unit said the Americans would help plan offensives in 2 Syrian cities held by ISIS. There was no immediate information on how many of them had arrived or to what branch or branches of the military they belonged. The news comes after Brett McGurk, President Barack Obama's special envoy to the coalition, said Sunday that U.S. forces would be arriving on the ground very soon. Let's think about this final statement. As you might recall, President Obama announced that he would be putting boots on the ground in Syria after vowing to never put boots on the ground in Syria. How short is our memory on everything? From the WWmd that didn't happen in Iraq, that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. How many other, that Vietnam was started by a false flag event? How short is the memory of the American population, and how long will they dangle at the end of the strings of the power structure? So to finish this statement, again, Obama saying he would be putting boots on the ground in Syria after vowing never to put boots on the ground in Syria. To wrap your head around this, Obama says he supports Ankara after Turkish F-16s shot down a Russian jet in Syrian airspace. But he's also sending U.S. soldiers to train Kurdish rebels who have been at war with Turkey since the dawn of time. Where is the logic in any of this? Creating more global conflict, one after another after another. American population needs to turn off the football games, put the beer back in the refrigerator, wrap up the chips, and pay attention, because everything is at stake. More headlines to put this ISIS terrorist threat into context. Turkish media on Turkish weapons headed for ISIS. This is what this headline is based on. Here is the headline. Turkish weapons heading to end in ISIS hands. RT speaks to journalists. Again, weapons being funneled through Turkey to end up in the hands of ISIS. NATO ally Turkey, U.S. ally Turkey, giving weapons to ISIS. Turkey, who corralled the refugees created by the Western bombing and then herded them off to invade countries everywhere. That Turkey. The report continues. Journalists from one of few remaining independent newspapers in Turkey, whose editors were recently arrested, have spoken to RT from their Istanbul office, sharing what they know about Turkey's alleged connections with the Islamic State. Let's not forget John McCain's connection with the leaders of ISIS. You can look this up. He stated it on Fox News. Not that I like Fox News or CNN or MSNBC. All of these agencies, let's think about this. All of these agencies will never, ever tell you the truth. They will never state or admit to the fact climate engineering is going on. They will never repeat many of the known truths about 9/11. They will never ever disclose the fact that, oh, by the way, there's almost 2,500 international experts, architects, engineers, speaking out that the official story is nonsense. You won't hear this kind of stuff from any of those agencies because they are owned lock, stock, and barrel by the same power structure that carried out the crimes to begin with. If you want truth, you're going to have to look for it. And if you don't go looking for it, you don't care much about your children, their future, or even your own future, because problem is not off on the horizon. It's not over the next ridge. It's kicking the door in now. Another headline: U.S. refused to attack Turkey. Turkey-bound ISIL oil trucks. Why would the U.S. refuse to attack supplies heading to Turkey from ISIL? Why is Turkey buying oil from ISIL? Let's continue with this report. The U.S. military refuses to attack Islamic State trucks that carry stolen Iraqi and Syrian oil to Turkey, arguing that these are civilian targets, a prominent Iraqi politician said on Saturday. Well, how come our drones are blowing up, in some cases, wedding parties with 50 innocent people? Our news doesn't talk much about that, do they? Look it up. The amount of civilians killed by drone attacks is staggering, absolutely staggering, but yet the U.S. refuses to attack ISIL oil trucks bound for Turkey. We need to look very, very closely at what's actually happening, because all of us are being herded off a cliff while the power structure carries out unbelievable crimes in plain sight. This report continues. This is from someone in the know on the inside. On this report, it states, this is a representative from one of the military's intelligence in Russia. I have personally contacted U.S. representatives asking them to target ISIL trucks transporting Iraqi and Syrian oil to Turkey, only to be told that those were civilian targets, so they could not attack them. A leader of the state law of coalition party in the Iraqi parliament and former national security advisor Moak Rubey told Russian intelligence by telephone on Saturday. Here we have people that are in the know trying, asking, begging, pleading for the U.S. to deal with the ISIS situation, and the U.S. refuses. On Wednesday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that the incident with the Russian Su-24 bombers shot down by a Turkish jet fighter over Syria was in response to Russian attacks on ISIS oil installations. There you have the bottom line. The U.S. refused to attack the ISIS tanker trucks selling oil to Turkey, funding their terrorism. Russia attacked those convoys of tanker trucks, and that's why their fighter jet was shot down. Another headline: Syrian army fired upon by mortars from Turkish territory. Again, it's a very tangled web. And the notion that the conflict in Syria is some fight for freedom and democracy is total nonsense. You just heard that they're stealing oil from Syria. ISIL is funding their terrorism, and Turkey's buying that oil for their profit. That's the true story that we don't hear. Final sentence on that report. Turkey fired a number of mortar bombs towards Syrian army positions, the Syrian army spokesman said Saturday. So this is simply a proxy war for resources, period. Should be obvious to any who are truly taking a look at what's happening. Now, Putin approves, this is another headline, by the way. Putin approves economic sanctions against Turkey following downing of Russian warplane. Why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he? I'm not in love with Putin. Russia is part of the climate engineering insanity. So is China. All other countries are conforming or either kept silent by all sorts of threats. We can only imagine what's going on in Paris right now with the pushing of climate engineering as the mitigation for the damage that's done to the planet, when climate engineering is a primary source of that damage. Not the only source, as so many want to believe. That's a ridiculous notion. But we have countries like Russia participating in the climate engineering. So nobody's innocent in this equation. But that being said, why wouldn't Russia implement sanctions against Turkey when their warplane was shot down for trying to fight the terrorists? What would the U.S. do, for example, if a U.S. warplane violated airspace just like Turkey did for 15 seconds, or what? It was even less than that. It was, I think, 7 or 8 seconds was the final outcome there. If the U.S.'s jet violated Turkish airspace for several seconds and they were shot down, what would the U.S. do? What would the U.S. do if a foreign country's drone blew up 50 of our civilians at a wedding party? What would we do? The American population doesn't seem to think much about this kind of thing. They're simply herded this way or that by whatever amazingly well-timed attack happens, just like the attack in France, so well-timed prior to the climate conference, and now those protesting the lack of climate action are now unable to protest. How convenient. Now there's a 90-day lockdown and the French government can kick in any door they want. And that's part of what all this is about. And I'm not saying that I know one way or the other the full story behind those attacks. I'm simply saying it's awfully convenient. Just like the 9/11 attacks were very convenient 1 year after think tanks like Project for a New American Century stated on the record that they needed a new Pearl Harbor to carry out their agenda of militarization and occupation in Middle Eastern countries. And there it was, 1 year later. We need to connect the dots, period. Final statement from a Turkish intelligence chief. Headline, Turkish intelligence chief, ISIS is a reality and we must stop Putin from crushing the Islamic Revolution. Let's think about that. This is our ally Turkey buying oil from ISIS. Clearly they don't have a problem with ISIS. They're buying their product. And here he is defending ISIS from being crushed. Doesn't want Russia to deal with ISIS. And let's stand back and think about this. Do we really believe that our government, if they chose to, with the most powerful, most advanced, most capable military in the world, there's no disputing that our government couldn't have crushed ISIS long ago if they wanted to? ISIS, a ragtag band of Toyota truck driving militants, no air force, no real means to defend against an attack from the U.S. military. No chance. No chance. This is a giant smoke and mirrors facade. It is. And we have to see it for that. Turn off the corporate media, turn off the absolutely ridiculous programs like CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News that feature as commentary people like John Bolton, who himself was the head of U.S. death squads in Central America. Who are these people to be telling us right from wrong? Know your history. Know who's talking to you on media sources that are run by the corporate powers. They're not going to tell you the truth. And if that's your only source of data and you're not looking anywhere else and you really don't want the truth, it's that simple. On to the climate talks again after the convenient terrorist strike which allowed them to eliminate any protest. Just in case you still harbored any illusions about what the COP21 in Paris is all about. Headline from before the conference started. France bows to Obama and backs down on climate treaty. Before the conference even began. That's something you have to understand and consider. This is all smoke and mirrors. The global powers are not going to do anything to curb the brutal pillaging and plundering of the planet and polluting of the planet. They're not going to do anything. Climate engineering is their cure, which is making the situation far worse, not better. Think about that. That's their cure. Let's fill the sky with light refracting, electrically conductive particulates, and let's manipulate those particulates with radio frequency transmissions, which are coming from everywhere, by the way. A lot more data indicates that even in civilian regions, many transmission sites are being built, many much closer to home than any of us might imagine, and these frequencies are highly damaging, not just to the environment, but to us. It's part of the climate modification manipulation system. What could go wrong? This is their cure, climate engineering. It's simply weather warfare. That's all it is. It's weather and biological warfare, period, plain and simple. Can't separate those two. Climate engineering is weather and biological warfare, and we are all test subjects in these experiments. I want to read from this report about France backing down. France has offered a key concession to the U.S. on the eve of historic climate talks in Paris, saying a new global climate accord will not be called a treaty and might not contain legally binding emissions reductions targets. So many claiming the contrary on that. So many claiming that that's the goal of those in power, to implement binding carbon treaties. Then how come they're backing out of that before the conference even starts? How many of these conferences have we been to? Conferences that had incredible weather anomalies at the time of the conference, which seemed to be a demonstration of geoengineering. The Cancun Climate Conference and the Copenhagen Climate Conference had record low temperatures at the conference, at the time of the conference, in spite of warmer than normal temperatures in surrounding areas. How does that happen? Geoengineering is how. And if you don't think they can do this, search engineered snowstorms, as I've stated before. Search Chinese scientists create engineered snowstorms. And if the Chinese can do it, and you don't think we can do it, you're not living in reality. Continuing from this report, in a significant climb down, Laurent Fabius, French foreign minister, said signatories to the planned deal would still be legally required to meet many of its terms, but most likely not the carbon cutting goals underpinning the agreement. In other words, nothing binding coming out of this conference. It's simply a grand facade. Continuing, John Kerry, U.S. Secretary of State, warned in an FT interview this month that the Paris Climate Change Summit could not deliver a treaty that legally requires countries to cut their emissions. There you have it, before the conference even started. Because their cure is geoengineering. They can engineer snowstorms, they can make it look cool on the ground in different regions for a while at the cost of far worse overall warming conditions. When will the environmentalists face this issue? Because you can't really have a legitimate discussion about the climate without discussing climate engineering first and foremost. You can't. We live in a world where the whole of academia is not willing to face this issue. And in some sense, I understand they're being threatened. As we discussed before, National Weather Service and NOAA have muzzles on them, federal gag orders, on top of not having First Amendment rights to begin with. So we can understand to a degree why they're not speaking out. But I hope people in the climate science community understand that hiding in the shadows on a ship that is sinking will not save you. We need you to step forward now while there's some part of Earth's life support systems left to salvage. That you can't have any legitimate discussion about the climate without discussing climate engineering. Continuing with this report, at the time, François Hollande, the French president, reacted angrily to Mr. Kerry's comments, saying making the accord legally binding was the whole point. He continues, if it were not binding, there won't be an agreement because that would mean it would be impossible to verify or control undertakings that aren't made. He said, EU and other countries have long said the Paris deal should be an international treaty with binding measures to cut emissions. But Kerry already said, not going to happen. Let's continue. Another headline. This is from New Scientist. This is important to understand and consider in regard to how dire our situation is. Headline from New Scientist. Paris Climate Summit. Earth may warm by 6 degrees C, even with a deal. 6 C, that's almost 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Think about that and consider this. Humans have not lived on this planet at temperatures above 3.5 C, above baseline. A little over half what New Scientist says temperatures may be already locked in for. That's how serious our situation is. Again, we're through the guardrail. We're heading to the bottom of the canyon. We have to have a complete course change or game is over. Continuing with this report, under the headline I just read from New Scientist, says the optimistic view, the Paris Protocol will at least keep global warming below 4 degrees C. Again, still above any temperature at which humans have ever survived on this planet. That's the optimistic view. The realistic view, also from New Scientist, and I'm quoting, global temperatures could rise 4 C even if the Paris Protocol is widely successful, which it won't be. What does this mean? It means that nobody in power is doing anything to change course. It's up to us. They are geoengineering. Why? Because they can. Because the population doesn't seem willing to stand up, find out the facts, and help to bring these programs to light and to an end. Finishing with this report, this planet has not experienced an ice-free Arctic for at least the last 3 million years, and maybe for as long as 13 million years. Humans have never lived on the planet at 3.5 C above baseline. There you have it. That's not just my data. It's indisputed scientific data. That's a tremendous change in temperatures. That's almost 7 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a massive, massive change globally. People have no idea the ramifications of such a change. Another headline, climate change, falling oxygen levels may be more dangerous than flooding. Again, there is so much happening and so quickly, so many feedback loops all feeding on each other. How many people are talking about declining oxygen levels? Some of us have been for a very long time. It's in my presentations going back years. Earth's oxygen content is declining radically. Many causes for that. Many of those factors, causal factors, lead right back to climate engineering. How is climate engineering affecting the lack of the forest's oxygen production now? Because the unbelievably intense UV radiation is scorching foliage. Why is there so much UV radiation? Because the particulates from climate engineering shred the ozone layer. Science fact. Look it up. Because the forests are dying from bioavailable metals affecting the root system. Also in disputed fact, we have lab tests around the globe to prove that the elements used in climate engineering patents are raining down in copious quantities to be inhaled by all of us and to poison the root systems of forests, cutting off the moisture, cutting off the hydrological cycle, just like we see in Northern California now. It doesn't rain much anymore. It just drips and drizzles. And our local meteorologists, because they're reading a script, they try to play it up like we've had something significant when we haven't. It used to rain here tremendously. The location I live in on the east side of Lake Shasta is about 240 inches of rain short for the last 8 years, not 4. So all these things are killing the forests. Forests are not absorbing carbon. They're not emitting oxygen. The intense UV radiation is killing plankton. We're down over 50% for global plankton populations. That's the largest source of oxygen on the planet. How long can we live when every breath we take is not only laden with toxic particulates sprayed by climate engineering programs, but when our oxygen content is declining? And those particulates, by the way, oxidize in the atmosphere, further consuming oxygen. This is a circus of insanity that we're all living in, period. And don't think it's off on the horizon. You can ignore it and go golfing and watch football and everything will be fine for your lifetime. Not going to happen that way. The trouble is here, now. Final sentence from this report of falling oxygen content from Science World Report. Falling oxygen levels caused by global warming could be the greatest threat to survival of life on Earth, greater than flooding. Researchers have taken a closer look at the gas composition of our planet and have found that organisms in our world's oceans will be decimated. Again, I state the plankton populations, largest source of oxygen on the planet, plummeting, absolutely plummeting. A number of reasons for that. But when a report like this from Science World, of course, completely omits the climate engineering elephant in the room, that's certainly inexcusable. But it doesn't change the fact that the reality they describe is happening. Even if they don't correctly name all the reasons, it doesn't change the reality, does it? The same is true for global warming and climate change. Even though official sources never mention the climate engineering elephant in the room, it doesn't mean the reality is not real. Even though we all love to hate Al Gore, the fact of the matter is this. Was Al Gore's data wrong? Yes, it was all wrong. In fact, the actual climate situation is far worse than anything Gore stated. Let me finish this report. The researchers found that an increase in the water temperature of the world's oceans to about 6 degrees Celsius could stop oxygen production by phytoplankton by disrupting the process of photosynthesis. About 2/3 of the planet's total atmospheric oxygen is produced by ocean phytoplankton, and therefore a cessation would result in the depletion of atmospheric oxygen on a global scale. This would likely result in the mass mortality of animals and humans. That is straight from the science manual. I went to a Chico climate march on November the 28th. This is from the 350.org group, and I was sorely disappointed at their, as a whole, not in all of them, but at their willingness to deny the climate engineering reality. 350.org is run by a man named Bill McGibbon, who receives money from the Rockefeller Foundation. So it's not much of a surprise that they will not touch the climate engineering issue, which makes everything they do, everything they claim to stand for, illegitimate, because you cannot discuss the state of the climate without first and foremost discussing the climate engineering elephant in the room. I hope that changes with the environmental groups that seem more concerned about protecting their 501c3s than they do addressing the truth. More concerned about protecting their 501s than they seem to be about saving the planet, the epitome of hypocrisy. On that theme, the total denial, there's another recent rash of articles and rants that have surfaced claiming global warming is a hoax and that we're entering another ice age. Many of these articles and rants are from sources and sites that claim to be independent and who also claim to be in the fight to expose and halt climate engineering. These sites and sources interview people like paid disinformation liars such as John Coleman, who masquerades as a meteorologist. And for the record, Coleman has a degree in journalism, not meteorology. They also cite completely uncredible and incompetent sources like so-called Lord Monckton and Tim Ball, who, by the way, has also lied about his resume and also received funding from the fossil fuel industry. So, who funds all of these experts, by the way, in some form or another? Why would that be a surprise that the fossil fuel industry tries to put out disinformation to cloud people's thinking so they turn off their own sense of reason, so they don't even look around them and say, well, you know, no matter who's saying what, it seems like the climate's wrong. It's off. In fact, and even if it does get cold for a little while, it gets hot again quickly right afterwards. Something's wrong. And people, if they really want to know what's happening, don't believe anyone. Watch a film like Chasing Ice. No politics. Nobody's pushing an agenda. It's film footage from the ice deposits and how fast they're disappearing from around the globe. Isn't that the bottom line? So, in addition, when we have sources and sites citing people like Coleman, Tim Ball, Lord Monckton as credible sources, and these same people aggressively, tenaciously deny the climate engineering reality, ask yourself this: why would anyone that claims to be fighting against climate engineering use such people as sources? What's wrong with this picture? If such dubious sources are not available, many sites, so-called independent sites, just post a fictitious graph of global temperatures with no graph source shown. I want to say the following with complete clarity, regardless of the resistance it will cause toward me with those who are operating from an ideology and not facts. The planet is not just warming, it's in total meltdown. Geoengineering is further fueling the warming trend overall. Though climate engineering is being used for countless highly toxic and temporary cooldowns, how can there be any legitimate discussion of the climate without including the climate engineering issue, first and foremost? I recently viewed an interview with John Coleman, the man fraudulently masquerading as a meteorologist, who tenaciously denies geoengineering and refused to even acknowledge the term when this very well-known host brought it up. This interview I just viewed was astounding to me, that it was done by someone who claims to be fighting geoengineering and yet who refuses, at least so far, to look at the truth about the state of the climate, of which climate engineering is making it worse, not better. So by pretending the climate is fine and not warming and actually cooling, which flies in the face of all credible data from the front line and all credible sources. And again, forget the sources. Let's look at the front lines. Let's look at a film like Chasing Ice. You don't have formerly frozen methane releasing from the seafloor because it's getting cooler. You don't have ocean level rising at 10 times the former projected rate because it's cooling. You don't have forests burning down around the globe because it's cooling. If we're to effectively fight climate engineering, it's essential to understand what's happening and not say exactly what the fossil fuel industry and the geoengineers want you to say, that it's cooling. And what does that mean for them? That they can convince other countries to use geoengineering because, look, they convinced their population that the planet's cooling when in fact it's in total meltdown. If we're to have any chance at all of successfully exposing and halting climate engineering, we must have credibility. The groupthink herd mentality must be abandoned in exchange for honest investigation and the solid conclusions that come with it. So many claims are being made about events like the Paris Climate Conference. But what do we see so far? That the major powers are not about to sign any restrictions on carbon emissions. The major powers are not about to admit to the climate engineering crimes. So many completely factless claims are being made about there being no warming for 20 years, about the ice expanding all over the globe, about the climate changes just being natural cycle. Again, I ask, how can anyone claiming to be in the fight to expose climate engineering claim that our totally engineered climate is just natural? How can anyone claiming to be in the fight to expose climate engineering put out completely false, factless data which completely obliterates any and all credibility with those that we most need to build bridges with, the cowardly, so far cowardly climate science community that has yet to admit to the climate engineering elephant in the room? Why would anyone in that community, the climate science community, come anywhere near the anti-geoengineering community when they see that so many in this community are so totally off base in regard to our rapidly overheating planet? How can we say for sure, again, that the planet's overheating, as I stated earlier? Because the unfolding realities on the ground, forests are burning, that doesn't happen on a cooling planet. Formerly frozen methane expelling can't happen unless it's warming all over the globe. Does that happen on a cooling planet? No. Ocean temperatures are off the line, and that's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. A cubic meter of seawater contains 4,000 times the thermal energy of a cubic meter of air. I ask again, what's natural about cutting down and burning forests around the globe, paving the planet, polluting and killing everything, with geoengineering at the top of that list, and putting 100 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every single day? CO2 is necessary, of course, but way too much, too fast, that's bad. Water is essential for life, but how helpful is it if you're 10 feet under? Those that truly want to help in the fight to expose and halt climate engineering will take the time to dump their ideological herd mentality groupthink and actually do some real research. The knee-jerk propensity to take the opposite position of anything and everything the science community states is not rational. To believe the claims of the supposed 31,000 scientists that signed a petition that there's no global warming, investigate that petition. It's a total farce, a total fraud. If you bite the headline and never investigate, you're not helping the cause, you're harming it. To believe in the fossil fuel industry funded false graphs of global cooling without examining the front-line film footage of glaciers disappearing around the globe is not responsible. A 1,400 glacier survey globally, 1,396 are either gone or disappearing rapidly. Again, we have a responsibility to look at the truth, to understand what's real, what's not real, and what's making it worse. Climate engineering is making all of it worse, not better. It's not a cure, it's a curse. Headlines are not facts. Ideology is not a basis for conclusions. If you truly care about the truth, if you truly care about the fight for the common good, find out what the facts are. Taking the opposite position of Al Gore, again, not rational. It's not a rational basis for a conclusion. Yes, Gore was wrong, as I stated earlier. In fact, the climate is far worse than anything Gore said. That's the conclusion dictated by the data, not by me. That's by frontline data, covered and confirmed by film footage all over the globe. Of all the human sources of damage done to our planet, climate engineering is the most decimating of all. Total disruption of our rainfall, shredding of the ozone layer, complete contamination of the entire planet. All of the challenges we face are immense. But of all those challenges, if we are not able to expose and halt the climate engineering insanity, it will soon enough be game over. Climate engineering is weather warfare, which is also biological warfare due to the fallout from these programs. We need everyone to help with sounding the alarm, credibly, effectively, based on facts and reality, not on ideology. That's the effective way to win this battle. We are in a chess game, and you must take your compass heading each and every day. You don't march with information that you heard on a headline several years ago and think you know what's happening, because you don't. We need to all stand on solid ground. The sand in the hourglass is running out. We don't have much time. Let's make it count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.